Welcome to the personal Tanya for the 11th day of Shvat. That would be day 49. Today's topic is intimacy with God. The question is, how can a human being become intimate with God? You see, we've learned in the flow of the Tanya that there are two perceptions to reality. There's our perspective where we are separate from God, and then there's God's perspective, which is all one unity where everything is one with God. The chapter we're learning now, chapter 23, and the next chapter 24, show us how we can remain connected to God at all times and not lose focus. Remember that first word of the Torah is Bereshis, in the beginning. Can actually be read as Barashis. God created a veil, and our purpose is to peer beyond the veil, to see the truth, to see the essence without getting stuck in the superficial perception. So in today's Tanya, we learn that we learned really in the previous chapter that when sustaining entities that deny God, the divine energy, the divine life force is merely hovering in them, it's not united. But when it comes to a mitzvah, which is one of the 613 commandments or the 248 action mitzvahs, this is the ultimate purpose of creation. And hence, the life force, the divine energy, inside of a mitzvah of the 248 action mitzvahs is seemingly integrated with the mitzvah, not only with the mitzvah, but with the person doing the mitzvah as well. And that's the theme we're developing in today's Tanya. You see, it all starts with the Zohar, the founding text of the Kabbalah, that tells us that when it comes to divine intimacy, God and his Torah are one. So we know that there's going to be divine intimacy through Torah. But we also know that the mitzvahs, the commandments, are the limbs of the king. Just like a limb of a physical body, so to the mitzvahs are somehow the limbs, the manifestations of the king. So what the Zohar is telling us is that both in Torah and in mitzvahs is where we're going to be able to define divine intimacy. Now, we're not going to talk about the Torah, divine intimacy through Torah just yet. That's going to be later on in this chapter. But mitzvahs is what the topic of today's Tanya is, where just like the limbs are connected to the soul power within them. For example, the human eye. The human eye is a physical, fleshy eye, but it's the power of sight of the soul that is perfectly united. It's intimately connected with the limb of the eye. Same thing with the ears. The ears are a physical organ, but the power to hear is the soul's energy, which is intimately bound and connected with the ear. So the soul and the body are perfectly connected, where the ear is able to hear and the eye is able to see. As long as they're connected, the body and the soul, they flow together seamlessly. So too, just like the limbs of a body, so too are the mitzvahs to God. When we observe, when we are able to fulfill one of the 248 action mitzvahs, we are manifesting God's desire, because ultimately, we've learned previously in Tanya that God creates all sorts of props in order to give us free choice. He creates forces that deny God's existence only in order to give us the ability to make free choice, which means that they're not the ultimate purpose. They're just props in the scene. They're just ulterior motives. They're just the ulterior motives. But the ultimate purpose for God creating the world is in order for us to fulfill a mitzvah. And since that's the ultimate purpose for God creating the world, therefore, God's presence, God's energy, God's vitality, God's passion is found within the mitzvah. So therefore, Tanya tells us today that when we fulfill a mitzvah, we're becoming intimate with God on three levels. The mitzvah itself is a perfect conduit to God's true intent. In addition, our soul's power of action. Remember, we have three soul garments: that's thought, speech, and action. But the soul garment of action, which performs the mitzvah, also becomes a conduit for the will of God while performing the mitzvah, as well as the physical limb, which performs the mitzvah, also becomes a perfect conduit to the will of God. So whether you're doing charity through the hands, whether you earn that money through working with your entire body, or maybe you're eating kosher with your digestive system, or you're studying Torah with your brain, whichever part of the body is actively engaged in the mitzvah actually becomes a perfect conduit in divine intimacy with God. So the three parts, three platforms for this intimacy: it's the mitzvah itself, It's the soul garment of action, which becomes united with God, and it's the physical part of the body which performs this mitzvah. Now, the Alter Rebbe does give us in today's Tanya an aspirational case study, which is our patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who are called chariots. Why are they called chariots? Because just like a chariot follows every move of the driver, so too the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, served God with their entire being, where every single organ was an expression of the divine will. How we are also able to reach this, at least when we do an individual mitzvah with that one organ, we're becoming one with God. Just like the patriarchs, we're always connected to God. So even though every Jew reaches this communion with God when he performs the mitzvah, the uniqueness of the patriarchs is that all of their organs were fully surrendered at all times to God Almighty. And that's an aspiration for us to aspire towards. When we perform a single mitzvah with one part of our body, we also are becoming a chariot to God Almighty. In the next part of the chapter, we'll talk about how we can find divine intimacy through Torah in an even more meaningful way than through the mitzvahs. But for today, that's a wrap. Let's try to apply. You can do this.